Marcus Whitmore stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office on the 47th floor, looking down at Manhattan like a king surveying his kingdom. At 33, he had everything the American dream promised: a tech empire worth billions, a name that made Wall Street analysts sit up straight, and enough zeros in his bank account to buy small countries. Yet as he gripped his morning coffee, his hands trembled so violently that dark liquid sloshed over the rim, staining his $7,000 suit. He set the cup down quickly, glancing around to ensure no one had witnessed the moment of weakness. The shaking had started 6 months ago, subtle at first, easy to hide. But lately, it had gotten worse. Much worse. 3 different specialists, a dozen tests, and still no answers. The words neurological condition and progressive degeneration hung over him like a storm cloud he couldn't outrun. Marcus had built his fortune on control. Control over code, over markets, over every variable in the equation of success. But he couldn't control this. And if the board found out, if the shareholders caught wind that their golden boy might be falling apart, everything he'd built would crumble faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Whitmore, Elena is here for the morning cleaning," his assistant announced. He'd forgotten it was Tuesday. The cleaning service came 3 times a week, always professional, always invisible. He barely noticed them anymore. They were just part of the machinery that kept his perfectly curated life running smoothly. "Send her in," he said, smoothing his jacket and adopting the mask of confidence that had become his second skin. Elena Rodriguez had been cleaning Marcus's penthouse for 3 months, though he'd probably exchanged fewer than 20 words with her in all that time. At 28, she was a single mother working 2 jobs to make rent in Queens, a world away from the gleaming luxury of Park Avenue. Her English was heavily accented but improving, her determination as fierce as the New York winters she'd learned to endure. What made today different was that Elena's regular babysitter had canceled at the last minute, and her supervisor had reluctantly agreed to let her bring her daughter along, just this once, with strict instructions to keep the child quiet and out of sight. 3-year-old Sophia was a tiny thing with enormous dark eyes that seemed to take in everything. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit as her mother led her through the service entrance, whispering urgent instructions in Spanish about being very, very quiet. Marcus heard them arrive, but didn't look up from his laptop. He had a board meeting in 3 hours and quarterly earnings to review. The cleaning staff knew to stay out of his way. For the first hour, Elena worked with practiced efficiency, moving through the sprawling penthouse like a ghost while Sophia sat obediently in the corner of the living room, coloring in a tattered book. The little girl had learned early how to make herself small, how to be good when Mama needed her to be. But children notice things adults miss. While Elena vacuumed the hallway, Sophia wandered toward the kitchen, drawn by the sound of something falling. She peered around the doorway and saw the tall man, the one who lived in this palace of marble and glass, standing by the counter. He was trying to pour water from a bottle into a glass, but his hands were shaking so badly that water splashed everywhere. Sophia watched as the man cursed under his breath, as his jaw clenched with frustration. She saw something in his face that she recognized from the mirror on the mornings after Mama cried at night. He looked scared and alone. The man didn't notice her at first. He was too focused on his trembling hands, on the simple task that had somehow become impossible. When he finally managed to fill the glass, he gripped the counter with both hands, his knuckles white, his breathing heavy. That's when Sophia did something that would change both their lives forever. She walked right up to Marcus Whitmore, billionaire tech mogul, and without a word, she took his hand in both of hers. Her small fingers wrapped around his much larger one with gentle pressure, and she began to hum, a soft, wordless melody her mother sang when Sophia had nightmares. Marcus froze. For a moment, he could only stare at this tiny child who had appeared like an apparition in his kitchen. She couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall, with dark curls escaping from pigtails and a dress that had been washed so many times it had faded to a pale pink. But it was her eyes that stopped him. There was no pity in them, no fear, no judgment. Just a simple, pure kindness that he hadn't experienced in so long he'd forgotten it existed. "Your hands are scared," Sophia said in careful English, still holding his hand. "It's okay. I get scared too sometimes." Something cracked in Marcus's chest. This child, who had nothing, was offering him comfort with the unself-conscious generosity that only the very young possess. She didn't know who he was, didn't care about his net worth or his reputation. She just saw someone who needed help. And instead of pulling away, instead of calling for her mother or maintaining the professional distance he'd perfected over years, Marcus found himself kneeling down to her level. "Thank you," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "What's your name?" "Sophia," she said, smiling now. "My mama cleans her house. She works very hard." "I'm sure she does," Marcus said, looking at this child who spoke with such pride about her mother's work. Elena's panicked voice called from the hallway. "Sophia, ¿dónde estás?" When she rounded the corner and saw her daughter holding hands with Marcus Whitmore, her face went pale. She rushed forward, already apologizing in a rapid stream of Spanish and English. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. She was supposed to stay in the living room. Please, I told her not to bother you." "She's not bothering me," Marcus said, still kneeling. He looked from Sophia to her mother, really seeing Elena for the first time. He noticed the exhaustion around her eyes, the calluses on her hands, the pride and fear warring in her expression. "Actually, she helped me." Elena looked confused, still clutching her cleaning supplies like a shield. Sophia tugged on Marcus's hand again. "Can I show you my rabbit?" she asked. "He makes me feel better when I'm scared." And Marcus Whitmore, who hadn't taken an unscheduled break in 5 years, who ran his life like a military campaign, who had forgotten what it meant to simply be human, found himself saying yes. Over the following weeks, Tuesday and Thursday mornings became the only times Marcus looked forward to. He'd rearranged his schedule, something his assistant had noted with surprise, to be home when Elena arrived with Sophia. The board meetings could wait. The conference calls could be moved. At first, Elena had been terrified that she'd lose her job, that this powerful man would complain about her daughter's presence. Instead, Marcus had done something completely unexpected. He'd told her that Sophia was welcome anytime, and he'd asked his assistant to have a corner of the living room set up with proper toys, books, and art supplies. "Mr. Whitmore, this is too much," Elena had protested when she saw the elaborate play area that had appeared overnight, complete with a child-sized table and enough educational toys to stock a kindergarten classroom. "It's nothing," Marcus had said, which was true for him. The whole setup had cost less than he spent on wine in a month. But the look on Sophia's face, when she saw it, had been worth far more than the money. The little girl had approached the toys with reverence, as though they might disappear if she touched them. When she finally did pick up a brand new stuffed elephant, tears had welled up in her eyes. "For me," she'd whispered. "For you," Marcus had confirmed, feeling something tighten in his chest. What he didn't tell anyone was that Sophia's simple gesture that first morning had given him something he'd lost hope of finding: peace. When his hands shook now, he didn't spiral into panic. He remembered this child telling him it was okay to be scared, and somehow that made it bearable. The trembling hadn't stopped. If anything, some days it was worse. He'd finally gotten a diagnosis: early onset essential tremor, likely to progress. Not fatal, but potentially career-ending for someone whose image was built on unwavering strength and control. His neurologist had recommended medication, therapy, and stress reduction. Marcus had taken the pills, but ignored the rest of the advice. Until Sophia. Now, on the mornings Elena came to clean, Marcus found himself taking breaks he'd never allowed before. He'd sit on the floor with Sophia while she drew pictures, her tongue poking out in concentration. She'd narrate elaborate stories about her stuffed animals, casting Marcus in various roles. Sometimes he was a dragon who needed taming, sometimes a prince who'd lost his way, sometimes just a friend who listened. "Why do your hands shake?" Sophia asked one morning with the blunt curiosity of childhood. Elena, dusting nearby, immediately intervened. "Sophia, that's not polite." "It's okay," Marcus said. He'd been dreading this question, but realized he wanted to answer it honestly. "My hands shake because sometimes my body doesn't do what I tell it to. The doctors are trying to help, but it's hard." Sophia considered this seriously. "Like when I try to tie my shoes, but the bunny ears don't work?" Marcus smiled despite himself. "Exactly like that." "Mama says practice helps," Sophia offered. "And it's okay to ask for help." Such simple wisdom from such a small person. Marcus wondered when he'd forgotten these basic truths. When had asking for help become equivalent to weakness in his mind? "Your daughter is very wise," he told Elena, who was watching the interaction with an expression he couldn't quite read. "She has a good heart," Elena said softly. "Sometimes I worry the world will make her harder. But for now, she still believes in kindness." "Don't let the world change that," Marcus said, more intensely than he'd intended. "People like her are rare." What Marcus didn't know was that these mornings were transforming Elena's life too. The extra money he'd insisted on paying her, hazard pay for entertaining guests, he joked, though they both knew Sophia was hardly a hazard, meant she could cut back her evening cleaning shift. She could be home for dinner, help Sophia with her bedtime routine, have something that resembled a normal life. But more than the money, Elena was fascinated by this glimpse into Marcus's world. She'd cleaned homes of the wealthy before, had seen their excess and their carelessness. But Marcus was different. He was lonely, she realized. All his money, all his success, and he was desperately, achingly lonely. She watched how he came alive when Sophia was around, how the hard edges softened. She saw the way his hands shook when he thought no one was looking, saw him hide them in his pockets or clench them into fists. Elena's grandmother had suffered from tremors in her later years, and she recognized the shame and frustration in Marcus's eyes. One Thursday morning, Sophia was particularly chatty, telling Marcus about a field trip her daycare had planned to the zoo. "But I can't go," she said matter-of-factly. "Mama has to work, and the trip costs money." Elena felt her face burn. "Sophia, that's not. We've talked about this." "How much is the trip?" Marcus asked. "No," Elena said firmly, recognizing the look in his eye. "Mr. Whitmore, you've already been too generous. I won't accept." "I'm not offering charity," Marcus interrupted. "I'm wondering if Sophia might do me a favor. I'm supposed to donate to an education fund this quarter anyway, tax write-off. If she'd be willing to go to the zoo and take some pictures for me, maybe draw me some pictures of her favorite animals, that would actually be helping me out." It was transparently a fiction, but delivered with such sincerity that Elena couldn't quite bring herself to refuse. Sophia was already bouncing with excitement. "I could draw you a whole book," Sophia exclaimed, "with elephants and lions and maybe penguins." "That would be perfect," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "Actually, Elena, if you have a moment, let me get your information so my assistant can arrange the details." When Elena reluctantly provided her phone number, her first time ever exchanging personal contact information with a client, she didn't realize she was opening a door that would change everything. That evening, Marcus sat in his home office, ostensibly reviewing acquisition proposals. But his mind kept drifting to the conversation with Sophia, to the matter-of-fact way she'd accepted that she couldn't go on the field trip. How many other children in her daycare were in the same situation? How many experiences would they miss because of a price tag that meant nothing to him, but everything to their families? His phone buzzed with a message from his neurologist, reminding him about next week's appointment to discuss management strategies and lifestyle adjustments. He stared at it for a long moment before setting the phone aside. For years, Marcus had measured his worth in acquisitions and stock prices. But Sophia had looked at him with shaking hands and seen someone worth comforting. She hadn't needed him to be perfect or powerful. She just needed him to be human. Maybe he thought it was time to figure out what that actually meant. The crisis came on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. Marcus was in the middle of the most important presentation of his career, pitching a revolutionary AI platform to a room full of investors who could make or break his company's next phase. He'd rehearsed for weeks. Every slide was perfect. Every word was calibrated. But 10 minutes into the presentation, as he gestured toward the projection screen, his hand seized up. Not just a tremor, a full spasm that sent the laser pointer clattering to the floor. The room fell silent. Technical difficulty, Marcus joked, bending to retrieve it. But when he stood, both hands were shaking so violently he couldn't hold the pointer steady. Red laser light danced across the screen like a drunken firefly. He saw the investors exchange glances, saw his CFO's expression of alarm, felt the weight of every eye in the room cataloging his weakness. "I'll have my team finish the presentation," Marcus said, his voice steady even as his body betrayed him. "I need to take an urgent call." He walked out of the conference room with his head high, made it to his private office, and barely got the door closed before he collapsed into his chair. His whole body was shaking now, adrenaline and fear and frustration creating a perfect storm. His phone was ringing. The CFO, probably. Or his assistant. He ignored it. Ignored everything except the trembling that seemed to be taking over his entire life. This was it. The moment he'd been dreading. By tomorrow, rumors would spread. By next week, the board would call an emergency meeting. By next month, he'd be voted out of his own company, deemed unstable, unreliable, unfit. He'd lose everything. The thought should have terrified him. A month ago, it would have. But as he sat there in his office, his empire crumbling around him, Marcus found himself thinking about Sophia's stuffed rabbit and her matter-of-fact acceptance of fear. His phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, expecting his assistant or lawyer. Instead, it was from a number he'd added to his contacts 2 weeks ago but had never used. "Elena, Sophia wanted me to send you this." Below was a photo of a crayon drawing, a stick figure with yellow hair, him, presumably, holding hands with a smaller stick figure. Above them, Sophia had drawn a rainbow and what might have been a very optimistic interpretation of the sun. The message underneath read, "For when you're scared." Marcus stared at the drawing for a long moment. Then he did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He called in sick. Not to the office, they were already dealing with the fallout. He called Elena. "Hello." She sounded surprised, cautious. "It's Marcus Whitmore," he said. "I know this is irregular, but I was wondering, are you and Sophia free this afternoon?" There was a pause. "Mr. Whitmore, is everything all right?" "No," he said honestly. "But I think maybe you and Sophia could help with that." 2 hours later, Marcus found himself in a place he'd never been before, a public playground in Queens. Elena had been hesitant, clearly confused about why a billionaire was asking to spend time with her and her daughter outside of their normal arrangement. But something in his voice must have convinced her. Sophia, of course, was delighted. She showed him the swings, the slide, the monkey bars she was still too small to reach properly. She introduced him to other children with the easy confidence of the very young, unconcerned with things like social class or net worth. "This is my friend Marcus," she told a boy named Jamal. "His hands get scared sometimes, but he's very nice." Marcus watched Sophia play, watched Elena watch her daughter with fierce protective love, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. These people had so little by his standards. Elena's apartment was probably smaller than his master bathroom. But they had something he'd lost along the way to his billions. They had each other. They had community. They had a life that wasn't measured in quarterly earnings and stock prices. "Thank you for coming," he told Elena as they sat on a bench while Sophia dug in a sandbox. "I know this must seem strange." "A little," Elena admitted. She studied him carefully. "Something happened today." It wasn't a question. Marcus found himself telling her about the presentation, about the moment his body had failed him in front of people who needed to believe he was invincible. "I built everything on control," he said. "On being the smartest, the strongest, the one who never makes mistakes. And now my own body won't cooperate, and I don't know who I am without that." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something?" she finally said. "When I came to this country, I had nothing. I was pregnant, alone, scared. I couldn't control anything about my life. But Sophia," she looked at her daughter with such tenderness it made Marcus's chest ache. "She taught me that control is an illusion. The only thing we can really do is love the people around us and show up every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "I don't know how to do that," Marcus admitted. "I don't know how to be weak." "It's not weakness," Elena said firmly. "It's being human. And Sophia, she didn't help you that first day because you were strong or successful. She helped you because she saw you hurting. That's what people do. That's what community does." Sophia ran over then, covered in sand and grinning. "Marcus, come build a castle with me." He looked at his expensive suit, at the sand that would definitely ruin it. Then he looked at Sophia's hopeful face. "Okay," he said, and followed her to the sandbox. As he knelt in the sand, his hands still trembling but somehow steadier with purpose, Marcus Whitmore began to understand what he'd been missing. Success wasn't about control or perfection. It was about moments like this, being present, being vulnerable, being human. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. The board, probably. The investors. The crisis management team. All of it urgent. All of it important by the metrics that had ruled his life. But right now, he was building a sand castle with a 3-year-old girl who taught him more about strength than any business textbook ever had. The calls could wait. The fallout from the failed presentation was exactly as bad as Marcus had anticipated. The board called an emergency meeting. His largest investors requested a conference call. The tech blogs started running speculative pieces about his health and the future of his company. But instead of hiding or fighting or spinning the narrative, Marcus did something radical. He told the truth. He called a press conference against the advice of every lawyer and PR professional in his employ, and he stood before cameras and reporters and competitors, and he told them about his diagnosis, about the tremors, about his fear, about a little girl who taught him that vulnerability wasn't the same as weakness. "I've spent my entire adult life building walls," he told the assembled press, "proving I was the smartest person in the room, the most ruthless negotiator, the most visionary leader. But walls don't just keep people out. They keep you trapped inside. I'm done living that way." The response was mixed. Some praised his courage. Others called it a desperate PR stunt. His stock took a hit, not catastrophic, but enough to hurt. But something unexpected happened too. People started reaching out. other CEOs who'd hidden their own health struggles, employees who'd been too afraid to ask for accommodations, parents of children with disabilities who thanked him for normalizing what they dealt with every day. And through it all, Elena and Sophia were there. Not physically at first. Marcus was careful about that. He didn't want anyone to think he was exploiting a child for sympathy. But they talked on the phone. Elena would call in the evenings, and Sophia would chatter about her day, and somehow those conversations became the anchor that kept Marcus grounded when everything else felt chaotic. 3 weeks after his press conference, Marcus showed up at Elena's apartment in Queens. She opened the door looking exhausted. She'd just finished a double shift, and shocked to see him standing in her building's dingy hallway. "Mr. Whitmore? Is something wrong?" "Call me Marcus, please," he said. "And no, nothing's wrong. I have a proposition for you, but I need you to hear me out before you say no." Elena invited him in, clearly self-conscious about her small apartment with its second-hand furniture and toys scattered across every surface. Sophia emerged from the bedroom in princess pajamas, squealing with delight when she saw Marcus. "You came to my house," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around his legs. "I did," Marcus said, scooping her up despite his trembling hands. "And it's a very nice house." He meant it. There was a warmth here, a sense of home that his penthouse had never achieved despite its million-dollar view and designer furniture. After Sophia was in bed, after an elaborate bedtime ritual that involved 3 stories, 2 songs, and extensive negotiation about one more glass of water, Marcus and Elena sat at her tiny kitchen table. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Marcus began. "About my company, about what I want to do with my life. And I realized I've been running the wrong race, building the wrong thing." He pulled out a folder of documents. "I want to start a foundation. Not just writing checks, though there will be plenty of that, but actually building programs that make a difference. Educational initiatives. Support for working families. Resources for people dealing with health challenges like mine." Elena listened, uncertain where this was going. "I need someone to run it," Marcus continued. "Someone who understands what these communities actually need, not what some boardroom thinks they need. Someone who's lived it. Someone I trust." "You want me to work for your foundation?" Elena asked, confused. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm a cleaner. I don't have a college degree." "I don't." "You have something more valuable," Marcus interrupted. "You have integrity, wisdom, experience, and you've already proven you can handle the most difficult executive I know." He smiled. "Me. This is crazy," Elena said, but he could see the hope flickering in her eyes. "Probably," Marcus agreed. "But I've learned that the sanest thing I've done in months is listening to your 3-year-old daughter. So maybe crazy is what I need." He outlined his proposal, a salary that would change Elena's life, health insurance, support for continuing education if she wanted it, and the opportunity to build something meaningful from the ground up. "Why me?" Elena asked quietly. "Really? You could hire anyone." "Because Sophia saw me at my worst and offered kindness," Marcus said. "Because you've worked 2 jobs to give your daughter a good life and never once complained. Because when I told you about my worst day, you didn't offer platitudes. You offered truth. I've had enough people telling me what they think I want to hear. I need someone who'll tell me what I need to hear." Elena was quiet for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need," Marcus said. But the next morning, Elena called him. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll do it. For Sophia. For other families like ours. And maybe a little bit for you too." Over the following months, the Whitmore Foundation took shape. Elena proved to be a natural leader, fierce in her advocacy for the program she believed in, tireless in her work. Marcus found himself energized in a way he hadn't been in years, not by the pursuit of profit, but by the pursuit of impact. They funded after-school programs in underserved neighborhoods, created scholarships for children of single parents, built support networks for people dealing with chronic health conditions. Every decision was guided by a simple principle: what would actually help? Sophia became the foundation's unofficial mascot, though they kept her mostly behind the scenes. But her artwork decorated the office walls, and her perspective, filtered through her mother, informed more decisions than anyone might have guessed. Marcus's tremors didn't go away. Some days were better than others. He learned to adapt, to use voice-to-text when his hands wouldn't cooperate, to be honest when he needed help. His company brought in a co-CEO to handle day-to-day operations while Marcus focused on long-term vision and the foundation. Some people called it a step down. Marcus called it the first step up he'd taken in years. He still had hard days. Days when the frustration of his body's limitations made him want to punch walls. Days when he questioned every decision. Days when he felt like a fraud playing at philanthropy. But then Sophia would draw him a picture, or Elena would tell him about a family their scholarship had helped, or he'd visit one of their programs and see children like Sophia getting opportunities they'd never have had otherwise. And on those days, his hands might still shake, but his purpose never wavered. 18 months after a 3-year-old girl had first taken his trembling hand in her tiny fingers, Marcus Whitmore stood on a stage in Queens at the opening of the Whitmore Foundation's first community center. It was housed in a renovated building that had once been a factory, now transformed into a bright, welcoming space with a library, computer lab, art studio, and medical clinic. The crowd was packed with families from the neighborhood, local politicians, press, and supporters. But Marcus's eyes kept drifting to the front row, where Elena sat with Sophia on her lap, both dressed in their finest. Sophia waved at him enthusiastically, and Marcus couldn't help but smile. She was 4 now, growing so fast it made his heart ache. Still carrying her stuffed rabbit everywhere, still seeing the world with that particular magic that only children possess. 18 months ago, I was broken, Marcus told the audience, his voice amplified by the microphone but still carrying the slight roughness that came from emotion. Not just physically, though my hands still shake, as you can see, but spiritually. I had everything society told me to want, and nothing that actually mattered. He paused, looking at his notes, but then decided to abandon them. This needed to come from the heart. A very wise little girl taught me that being scared is okay, that needing help is human, that the measure of a person isn't in what they control, but in what they give. He gestured to the building around them. This center exists because I finally learned to ask the right questions. Not, how can I make more money? But how can I make more difference? Not, how do I hide my weaknesses? But how do I use my strengths to help others? The crowd applauded, but Marcus held up a hand. He wasn't finished. The person who really made this happen is Elena Rodriguez, our foundation's director of community programs. She took a chance on a billionaire who showed up at her door with more money than sense. She taught me what real courage looks like. The courage to show up every day for your child, to work multiple jobs without complaint, to believe that things can get better even when every odd is stacked against you. He looked directly at Elena, who was wiping tears from her eyes. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for sharing Sophia with me. Thank you for reminding me what matters. After the ceremony, after the ribbon cutting and the tours and the interviews, Marcus found a quiet moment with Elena and Sophia in the new art studio. Sophia was already at an easel, creating something that looked like it might be a rainbow or possibly a very abstract horse. She wants to be an artist when she grows up, Elena said, watching her daughter with that blend of love and worry that seemed universal to parents. She can be anything she wants, Marcus said. We'll make sure of that. I still can't believe this is real sometimes, Elena admitted. A year and a half ago, I was cleaning houses and hoping I could make rent. Now I'm running programs that help hundreds of families. It feels like a dream. If it is, don't wake up, Marcus said. You've changed more lives than you know, including mine. Sophia came over then, paint on her hands and a serious expression on her face. Marcus, can I tell you something? Always, he said, kneeling down to her level, a position that had become familiar and comfortable over these months. Your hands aren't scared anymore, she said thoughtfully. They still shake, but they're not scared. How come? Marcus looked at his trembling hands, at this child who'd seen through to the heart of things before he'd understood them himself. Because I learned that shaking hands can still do good things, he said. They can still help people. They can still build things that matter. The shaking doesn't change that. Good, Sophia said matter-of-factly. Then she hugged him, getting paint on his expensive suit, and Marcus found he didn't care at all. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the center had been locked up for the night, Marcus took a walk through the neighborhood. He passed bodegas and playgrounds, apartment buildings and corner stores. This was Elena's world, the community that had shaped her and Sophia. His phone rang. His co-CEO, calling with news about a major acquisition deal that had just closed. It was good news, great news by any metric. The company was thriving, stock prices were up, and Marcus was wealthier than ever. Congratulations, Marcus said sincerely. You've done an incredible job. We've done it together, his co-CEO corrected. Your vision is still what drives everything. But Marcus knew his vision had changed. Success still mattered, but not as the end goal, as a means to create more opportunities like the one they'd opened today. He thought about Sophia's question about his hands. She was right, in her infinite childhood wisdom. They weren't scared anymore. Not because the trembling had stopped, it hadn't and might never, but because he'd learned that his worth wasn't tied to his body's cooperation. His worth was in the choices he made, the people he helped, the love he gave and received. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Sophia says to tell you thank you for being her friend. Also, she wants to know if you like horses because she drew you one. He smiled, typing back, I love horses, especially abstract ones. Tell her I'll hang it in my office. Another text came through. She also says your hands are brave. Marcus looked at his trembling hands in the streetlight, these hands that had once felt like traitors to his ambitions. Brave. Maybe Sophia was right about that too. He thought about the Marcus he'd been 18 months ago, terrified, isolated, measuring his worth in market cap and quarterly earnings. That man would have seen his tremors as a death sentence, a loss of everything that mattered. But this Marcus, the one who'd learned to build sandcastles and hang children's artwork and ask for help, knew better. He'd lost nothing that mattered and gained everything he'd been missing. His hands still shook. They probably always would. But Sophia had taught him that shaking hands could still hold onto what mattered. They could still offer help. They could still reach out and connect. And in the end, that was the only thing that had ever really mattered at all. As Marcus walked back to where his driver waited, he passed the playground where he'd first come to find himself again. A young mother was there with her daughter, pushing her on the swings in the growing darkness. He thought about stopping, about introducing himself, about telling them about the foundation and the programs they offered. But instead, he just smiled and kept walking. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more families to help, more programs to build, more opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, he was just a man who'd been saved by a child's kindness, who'd learned that the most important things in life couldn't be measured in dollars or controlled with iron will. Tonight, his hands were shaking, and his heart was full, and for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Whitmore was exactly where he was meant to be. He pulled out his phone and sent one more text to Elena. "Thank you for everything. Tell Sophia her painting changed my life." The response came quickly. "She knows. Children always know." And as Marcus climbed into his car to head back to his penthouse, which no longer felt quite so empty now that he understood what really made a home, he realized that Sophia had given him more than comfort that first morning. She'd given him a future worth living. His hands trembled as he looked out at the city lights, at the millions of lives being lived in the buildings around him. But they were steady enough for what mattered. Steady enough to help. Steady enough to love. Steady enough to make a difference. And really, what else did anyone need? The end.